Welcome to Greg Plays Games. Today I have my review for Metroid Dread on the Nintendo Switch. If this is your first time checking out one of my reviews, I break my reviews into a few different categories. So the first one is art direction and atmosphere, then creativity, characters and story, and then finally gameplay, which is just a general overview of the controls, level design, and difficulty. And then I score each of those categories, and then in the end I'll kind of give my final thoughts on the game and give you the final score. So if this is your first time to the channel, please consider subscribing. Definitely hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. And without further ado, let's get into the review. First up, we have art direction and atmosphere. While the graphics aren't earth-shattering from a visual fidelity perspective, the art style, color choices, and music create a feeling of isolation and suspense that perfectly align with the game's title of Dread. Upon the first reveal, I was pretty underwhelmed with the graphics, but after experiencing the game, you just become fully immersed in the world of Metroid Dread. The best games aren't just visually pretty to look at, you are also immersed in just fully experiencing the game. When you're truly immersed in a game, you don't notice things like the graphics quality, and the music just perfectly complements or highlights the story beat or heightens the emotions that the protagonist is experiencing. And you don't necessarily think about these things when they're executed at a high level. They just completely fulfill the experience, and that's creating the immersion, and that's why people love video games, because this medium does it so much better than movies, music, or just art, because you're fully experiencing those things. So even though this is just a 2D side scroller, it really does a good job of executing the immersion of feeling isolated and always on edge, unlike any game I've ever played before. I'm not huge into horror games or anything of that genre, so obviously there are probably games that do this to a more serious degree, or maybe it's like more intense scare. This is not that. It is suspenseful, and it is, it puts you on edge at times, but it's not scary, it's not frightening. But the atmosphere in this game is just so well done. Nintendo always kills it with their atmosphere. So for art direction and atmosphere, it's getting a 10 out of 10 for me. I really don't know what they could have done to improve the art style or the atmosphere any more than what they did. Next, we have creativity. This is a genre of gaming that Metroid literally defined, the Metroidvania genre, and by every definition of it, it is a typical Metroidvania. From a creativity standpoint, it doesn't do anything to redefine what the game genre is, but it does execute the gameplay style and genre at the highest possible level. Prior to Metroid Dread, I had actually never played a Metroid game, so this was my first one, but I had definitely played several Metroidvania style games before, and one of my favorites is Guacamelee. And in comparison just to that, and I think that's a very highly executed game. It's one of my favorite 2D games for sure, but it's so clear that game takes direct inspiration from this, and this game just does it to the highest level, as Nintendo typically does. So despite the fact it doesn't create new ways to experience the genre, its perfection is enough that this is going to be an influential game for Metroidvania style games to come. But just because it doesn't do anything brand new, I'm giving the creativity an 8. Next category, we have characters and story. There are really only a few characters that you cross paths with during Metroid Dread, but in order to avoid spoilers, I'm really only going to touch on a few. And character relationships are not what this game is focused on anyways. So obviously you play as Samus Aran, and you're just trying to navigate to the surface on this planet, and along the way you counter several Emmy robots that have been programmed for hands-on sight with Samus. So if you cross paths, get ready to square up. but you're actually outpowered for most of it, so you're actually just running away. But these sections of the map where you run into the enemy serve as the main dread point in the title, and they are truly stressful to play through. You're definitely going to want to be fully deodorant applied when you're playing this game, because you're going to be sweating. For those of you who get sweaty hands, maybe have a few extra controllers charged up just to kind of circulate those, and you're not sweating all over the place. But throughout your journey as Samus, you unlock new abilities along the way. It all is pretty typical of, or at least what I assume is typical of the Metroid franchise. I've played enough Smash Bros. To kind of know what power-ups to expect. And, you know, all the enemies are pretty tough at first, but your power-ups kind of scale with that. Too, and except for the Emmys kind of are always stronger than you. So you're really just playing as Samus, and you kind of unlock who she is and part of her past along the way to the surface and your ship. So the story is nothing really too crazy. The protagonist, Samus, does have an interesting story, and I wasn't really expecting the narrative to be as engaging as it really was. I was just kind of here to do some bounty hunter shit, and I ended up leaving with a pretty satisfying story. I'm gonna give this story an 8 out of 10, just because it is so simple and straightforward, and it's, you know, nothing too crazy. Alright, and lastly we have gameplay. So in the gameplay, I'm going to talk about the controls a little bit, the level design, and then just the general difficulty. Story has never really been Nintendo's main focus in gaming. If you kind of just think about Mario or Zelda, there's always a very clear, simple goal to each of those games. There's a princess that needs saving, and there's a boss that's preventing you from doing that. And you know, the same holds true here. There's a little more in-depth, and Nintendo is starting to develop their narrative in gaming, which may or may not be a good thing. Only time will tell. And by time, I mean the Super Mario movie. Anyways, so in Metroid Dread, you know, you have a simple story, and what I was really trying to say was Nintendo has always focused their games around the games themselves. The story, you know, comes along with it, but they've always focused on creating fun games, and you know, they did it again with Metroid Dread, a super fun game. It just feels good to run around as Samus, and I mean, it has some really, really, like, suspenseful parts, unlike any game I've experienced before. That could be overhyped, perhaps. I don't really play scary games that much, so I'm not really out here getting scared that often. So definitely take that suspenseful part with a grain of salt. If you are kind of a frightened little scaredy cat like myself, then maybe this game will get you on edge. Maybe it won't. But you always feel outpowered by the enemy, and I thought that was a really fun aspect of the game, because even no matter how strong Samus's power-ups got, you were always outmatched by them, and it was just kind of a refreshing gameplay mechanic, you know. And more so the power-ups too. Each time you power up, you unlock new parts of the map. That's kind of the quintessential aspect of the Metroidvania genre, and you know, so not only are you getting stronger, now you can reach new areas. All the power-ups, you know, make you feel like a total badass. Like, it's just fun to run around and shoot stuff in the game. You can turn invisible, like you just saw in the footage. Kind of, as you get later in the game, a feature I didn't really think about too much. But there's like a degree of fluidity to the game, where, like, it just controls really well. Everything is very smooth. And it's just really well done, the control aspect of it. The levels also, I kind of touched on it with the power-ups. They're a lot more intricate than you would expect. because you might get a power up and now you can access this area, but you need another power up to access another area. So the story kind of funnels you into the correct places to go. There were definitely instances during the game where I wasn't really sure if I was going the right direction, but even when I didn't think I was, I just kind of naturally ended up going to the right place just because of how the levels are designed. So it's a testament to Nintendo for telling you where you need to go without actually telling you where you need to go, so that you really feel like you figured it out on your own and you feel like you accomplished something. They've done that so well for so many years. So tip of the fedora to Nintendo on their level design. I do, however, have one kind of negative for the game from its controls perspective, and it really peeved me at first. Eventually I just got used to it and it wasn't even really a huge deal, but it still doesn't make any sense to me. And you aim with the left stick, and the right stick, you don't do anything with it. You don't use it for anything. You click it in to turn invisible, but you don't aim. Like, I just, in my brain, it makes sense to use the right stick to aim. My friend Pedro was a 2D shooting game, and it was a really fun game, actually. I would recommend checking it out if it were on sale, perhaps. But you can slow down time, and you can like aim and shoot your guns, and maybe from that it just like made me want to use the right stick to aim. But I just thought it was so strange that you don't aim with your right stick, and they have a dedicated button to press in to aim at a 360 degree rotation. I don't know. Makes no sense. Kind of a minor gripe in the grand scheme of things, but I thought it was so strange. And lastly, I want to talk about the difficulty of the game, because this game is tough. It is not for the faint of heart. I feel like I've played enough video games to know when I'm getting my ass kicked, and this game was kicking my ass, and it took me almost 2 hours just to beat the final boss of the game. It was really satisfying once you beat it, obviously, but yeah, it was difficult. If you've ever played Cuphead, the boss battles aren't... The final boss is like a Cuphead battle, I would say, just as a point of reference, where you learn from dying over and over and over again. So as long as you get comfortable with failing a ton and learning from your mistakes, I think you'll have a ton of fun with this game, and just kind of go into it with that perspective if you're not used to playing games that challenge you in such a way. And so with that, my final gameplay score is a 9, so very high, and all of those scores average out to my overall score for the game, which is an 8.75, and honestly, I did score it, but it just feels like the perfect score for this game. And really what is kind of holding it back, in my opinion, is just the length. It took me less than 10 hours to beat the entire story, and for a $60 game, I definitely want to get more gameplay out of that. I will say, of course, that the time that I did play the game, I really enjoyed it, but I definitely wish that it were a little bit longer, and I can always go back and replay it, sure. I can definitely do that, but I do wish for $60 it had a little bit more legs, but that's just my personal opinion. I do think that the conversation of, is this game worth $60, is interesting, and something totally separate from the review. I definitely think they could have given us a little bit more for our money as far as content length goes, but maybe it left off at the perfect time, and you never know, maybe they'll add DLC or something along those lines too. I say that with a smug grin on my face, because they would never do that. Let me know in the comment section if you think this was worth $60, if you ended up buying it, and if not, is it because you don't think it's worth it, or you're just not that excited about it? I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Thank you for checking out this review. 8.7 for Metroid Dread.